and welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. On the show today, we'll meet a writer who weaves his experience as a journalist with the fascinating characters who live where the Detroit River flows. We'll hear music from local singer-songwriter Allison Brown, and then I'll introduce you to a Windsor poet whose work can be sweetly poignant and honest, or fiercely poignant and honest. All of that, but never boring. But first, Paul Vasey is the author of a dozen books, including a recent memoir, and we'll talk about that shortly. His award-winning work as a journalist took him from the Owen Sun-Times to the Windsor Star, Hamilton Spectator, and Canadian Press. And we'll talk about his other media gigs. Paul Vasey, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you here because I've enjoyed so much of your work over the years, and I really enjoyed this book.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I want to talk to you about, some of your early days. I know the book really sort of takes us through your life.
Yes.
Very interesting parts of your life.
That's right.
This starts when you're 20.
Yes.
What did you do before then?
I was in a rock band. And,
no kidding.
And I started in newspapers when I was 14. And I was a terrible student in school, horrible student in school. And failed grade 9, failed grade 11. And I was working at the Owen Sun-Times doing youth column, high school column. And I was begging the editor to hire me, but he wouldn't do so until I was out of grade 12. I had to pass grade 12. Then he would hire me, So that's when I was working there and in a rock band, then came to Windsor in, I think, 66, somewhere around there, 65, 66.
Now, the editor was responsible for you getting to Windsor.
Yes. I loved Art Davidson. He was a fabulous man. And he had taken me under his wing, and he was just so good to me. And I paid him back by quitting his job. A friend of mine got a job as a salesman for a printing company. He had his own car, his own office. He was making 4 times what I was making.
Wow.
And he said, they're hiring. And so I went around, and the guy hired me. I thought, this is fantastic. I bought a suit. I was ready to have my car.
You?
Yes.
In a suit? I've never seen you in a suit.
No, I only have one. Anyway, as I was walking in the door, I thought, no, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. I'm not a salesman. I can't do this. And as well, I felt this horrible sense of betrayal of Art Davidson, who was the editor who had been grooming me. So I waited a week and went back to ask my job back, and he said, I wish you'd come a couple of days ago because I just hired your replacement.
Well, you must have been devastated.
Well, I was. And then he said, just wait a minute. And he went into his office and picked up the phone. And a few minutes later, he just waggled his finger, and I went in. And he gave me a sheet of paper, and he said, go to Windsor and see this man. He's got a job for you. So, I mean, what a sweet man he was. Eh? Yeah.
Wow.
So that's how I came to Windsor. And the name on the paper was Norm Hall, who was the editor of the Windsor Star at the time.
Reading your book, you had so many experiences when you, even in those early months of getting settled.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of those.
Well, when I first met Norm, and I had to come with a sort of a prepared speech on what I would do and so on, and I went in to see him, and he said, "You'll start Monday," and that was it. I had this speech that I was ready to give him, and I never got to give it to him. And then he said, "Where are you staying?" And I was at the Norton Palmer. And he said, "Well, you can't stay there on what I'm going to pay you." And so he gave me a piece of paper, and on the paper was the name of a landlady on Victoria Avenue. And so that's where I went. And yes. Yeah, so I'll describe the place.
Yeah.
When you came in, it had been a home, but now she had carved it up into rooms, and there were 4 or 5 rooms, I think. And mine was on the top floor, the last one that she had available. And number 5, and it was on the 3rd floor. There's a fire escape, she said, and this is not reassuring, as she apparently meant it to be. Most of my boys have been with me for quite a time. I have very little turnover, but if somebody does leave, you'll be next in line for a larger room. Go up and see it. If it suits you, it's $20 a month. And I told her I was sure it would be fine. And she said, see it first. You should never take anything sight unseen. So, and then she said, you'll see the rules of the house on the way up. And she'd printed these rules in big block letters on bits of paper that were stuck to the walls all through the house. And I'll just, some of them. No alcohol. No female visitors at any time! Exclamation point. No noise after 9 p.m. Turn out the lights, and so on. On the wall beside the bathtub, showers, 5 minutes. On the wall above the toilet, if you're reading this, the seat should be up. On the wall beside the sink, clean up after yourself. On the wall beside the door, shut the lights. And it wasn't clear whether she meant we should shower in the dark.
What fascinated you about the river? I mean, were you immediately sort of drawn to it, or was it something that as time went along and you met characters that it became sort of more important to you?
Here's a moment for honesty. Dan Wells said, I want you to write a book about the river. And I had no interest in writing a book about the river.
Yeah.
And what I did have an interest in was writing about the characters whom I'd met and who enthralled me. And but I agreed to write a book about the river, so I had to put the river in the book.
Right.
That's the way it works. And there's lots of interesting stuff about the river.
Yes,
and,
absolutely.
And the history and so on. But I made a point of mentioning the river often. And,
you did well.
So I could keep Dan happy. And and he would say, how's the book coming along? Oh, great, it's fantastic, really making progress. And I hadn't done a thing. And then he said another few weeks later, can you show me something? I said, well, I'm just right in the middle of something. When I get this, I had nothing done. I didn't do it. None of the research was done, nothing. And then he finally said, look, I've got to see whatever you've got. And so I showed him, I think it was the part about Al Borshak, the boxer.
Yes.
And a bit about Yorkie. And so I showed him some of this stuff. And he said, I love this. And I thought he was going to cut me off, from doing the river, and that I would get to do something else. But no, this is it. So then I managed to work the river in. And the river is obviously an integral part of town, right? Mm-hmm. We're a river town. And I've always lived on the water. We lived, when I was growing up, on Lake Ontario, and then on Georgian Bay, and then on Lake Huron, and now here on the river. And so water has always been the background of my life. And and I do and I love going down there. I love walking down by the river and talking to people down by the river. And sometimes at night I'll go down, and it's beautiful at night. Hey? You see these things, you can feel the freighters before you see them. You can feel the throbbing. It comes up through the river and through the ground into your feet. And I love that. And there's a scene in Brighton Beach. I love Brighton Beach. Dog Patch.
I loved all the things that happened down there.
And that, for me, it was such a forlorn little part of town. And people, I think, felt it was kind of slightly dangerous, didn't know about this, cars up on blocks.
And Bronson's.
Bronson's Tavern. And it was just like kind of a questionable neighborhood. But I met a guy who grew up there, and he grew up there. Were at one point a series of little cabins down by the river, 7 of them, and one front room, 2 bedrooms. That was the outhouse at either end. There was an outhouse at each end of this row. And Doug Todd was his name, and Doug said he would go out into the outhouse. This is such a Brighton Beach story. And he'd leave the door open, it's like Detroit over there, Zug Island, right?
Yeah.
So, and he would sit there, and he said he could feel the freighters before he could even hear them. And it was that throbbing coming up right through the outhouse.
Oh, the image.
And the image, but it was just like, the people there, as I said in the book, they're to me the real river people.
Yes.
They lived on the river. They swam in the river, they fished in the river. The river was absolutely central to their lives, and they loved it. And they loved that little neighborhood, and which, of course, is gone now, So,
I know.
Yeah.
As you were writing this, there was so much of your early life as a journalist here in this city, in here. What were you feeling as you were sort of going back and bringing back all those memories?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That you go back and you start thinking about things and trying to remember things and and misremembering things.
Yeah, oh, I love that as well. He was so honest.
And yeah, it was a very exciting time to be a kid in this business. I mean, you see things that most people never see in their lives. You know, you see people dying, you see burned bodies, you see murder victims, you see, I mean, all that awful stuff. And so on the one hand, it's horrible and revolting in some cases. But on the other hand, it's fascinating and it's thrilling. And so you have this odd juxtaposition of having seen, like I remember seeing this man die in a car accident. And I mean, he was living when I got there and he died while I was watching him and while they were trying to get him out. And then going back and writing the story. And I was so excited about this story. And then you think, well, that's sick. You know, there's something sick about this, you know, and yet that's the job. You know,
Yes.
and I was talking to a buddy of mine. He and I worked in newspapers for years together, and I said, you know, there's lots of talk about post-traumatic stress now, and the way we dealt with it, we went to Lee's.
Absolutely.
You know,
Went
and
to
we'd
drink.
it was 5 or 6
Yeah.
beers, and half a pack of cigarettes, and then you go back to work, and that was it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I don't know if it's had any lingering effect on my psyche or not, but yeah, it's been a ride. Eh? The business is a ride, that's for sure. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I could talk to you for another 15 minutes, but the time just flew.
We're done?
I know.
I'm just starting.
I know. So where can people buy this terrific book?
You can get it on Amazon, you can get it at Biblioasis, and I suspect you'll be able to get it at Chapters. I don't know, I haven't checked. Normally
you.
I'll go into bookstores and see if my stuff is
Yes.
there. But yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming up, we'll meet Windsor poet Vanessa Shields. But first, Allison Brown is a local singer-songwriter. Her sweet, powerful singing on her recent album offers listeners an invitation to follow her back in time, down lonesome railroad lines, exploring abandoned buildings, and to soar above the stratosphere as she illustrates landscapes both strange and familiar. Allison often appears with her band, The Assembly Line, but she recently recorded a solo album, Stitches and Incisions, here at Quantum Sound Productions studio in Kingsville. Here she is now in a new music video singing Model Railroad Town.
Don't you wanna live in a model railroad town, waving at the train as it circles around? Time has stopped on the hands of the station clock, and the only thing that's moving is the train. The only thing that's moving is the train. Somebody brought it home from the church rummage sale, took it down the basement, connected all the rails, painted white clouds on a bright blue sky, and the sun shines like a 60-watt light. The sun shines like a 60-watt light. From the old stone church to the library, from the lumber yard to the candy store, the world is as big as the ping pong table, but the train only ever takes me back to my own front door. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. From the old stone church to the library, from the lumber yard to the candy store, The world is as big as the ping pong table, but the train only ever takes me back to my own front door. Don't you want to live in a model railroad town, waving at the train as it circles around? Time has stopped on the hands of the station clock, and the only thing that's moving is the train. The only thing that's moving is the train. The only thing that's moving is the train.
That was Allison Brown singing Model Railroad Town from her recent album, Stitches and Incisions. Well, my next guest is fast becoming a very popular poet here in southwestern Ontario and beyond. Her themes encompass the width and breadth of human experience, especially female human experience, and she makes no apology for the raw reality of her language and subjects. I'm delighted to welcome Vanessa Shields to Scribes and Songsters. How are you?
I'm fabulous. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Beautiful intro. Thank you. It's very nice.
So you. I have two of your books here, and I've really enjoyed them both, and we'll talk about them at great length.
Okay.
But as I was reading this, I wondered, why do you write poetry? Why not novels or plays? What brings Vanessa to poetry?
That's how the words come to me in my brain. So there's a load of voices that are alive and well in my head, but the writing voice comes to me in stanzas or in like a single line. And I think because I've been practicing writing poetry and writing in a journal, so sort of stream of consciousness. Those are the two most practiced forms of writing that I've done in my life. And so it just comes naturally to me. That's not to say don't write novels or plays or other genres of writing, because I do, but poetry comes very naturally to me. And it also suits my life in terms of production time. So it doesn't take me very long to write a poem. Whereas, the novel that I'm working on is going on year 4.
Yeah.
I'm in revisions. There's been lots of drafts, but it just takes a lot longer. So in a nutshell, practice and time really is how poetry comes to me so naturally.
What inspires you?
Everything. Everything inspires me. I'm never not inspired. I've never suffered from writer's block.
You're very lucky.
I feel like, if anything, the block is just there's too much and I have to sit down and decide what I'm going to work on. So I'm grateful that I have that experience when I'm doing my creative work. But certainly for these particular books that you've read, my family inspired me, my children, my body is a big inspiration and challenge. And I'm just inspired by other women who I meet and, the journeys that we all go on. And I'm grateful that I'm a woman and get to experience the things that I can experience because I am a woman. And so, those things are all super inspirational to me.
And you talk about your work is very personal. It's very sensual. It's very funny. And I know that your husband, Nick, figures in some of this in a very sensual way. How is he with it?
So the deal is that honesty is the best policy and trust. So, because I do write about our sex life, he jokes that as long as it's, I'm writing great things and saying the truth about how great it is.
And it's not just awful.
That, he jokes about that, but he trusts me 100%, and he trusts that I'm going to be aware of the readers, including he as a reader, when I'm doing the work. And so because he trusts me to be free with my thoughts and what I want to communicate, I feel a freedom when I write. And I think it's really important to write and talk about sex, but in the intimacy of it. Especially because it changes over the years, especially when you have children. It changes when you're having sex to make a baby. So all of those things I think are really important to talk about. And I think there are things that we do talk about amongst our girlfriends. I know men talk about sex too, but it's a whole different ballgame.
Yes, it is.
And so I'm just the one who is willing to put it on the page, and I've gotten both ends of reactions to that. Some people are offended and they feel like that it's too intimate and too much information, Vanessa. We don't need to know this. But then on the other hand, people just love it and they say, "Oh my God, you write things that I think, but I would never say out loud." So I sort of get my joy from the latter, but also learn, from the folks who are offended, and maybe if they can tell me why, or we can have a little bit of more of a conversation about that. I'm learning, and then I'll write, in a response to that too.
Do you find a different response from men than women?
Depending on the poem, like the sex poems, there's one in particular which the title in itself will give you an idea of what it's about, but it's called Doggy Style. And so I get sort of smirks and kind of happy giggles from the men, and women kind of like, I get you kind of winks. So depending on the poem, I get different reactions. My first book, that was a memoir about being pregnant for the second time, the feedback from the men was they were all really grateful because they didn't know so specifically what was happening to their partner's body. So everything from like what happens to your breasts to the stuff that comes out of you, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to a vagina. So they came back to me saying, thank you, because I had no idea. And my partner really didn't want to tell me about this or didn't even think to tell me about this. So they were grateful that it was there for them to learn about. So I think it depends on the man who's reading it and sort of his comfort level, and but it's usually been playful and joyful responses. Yeah,
and there are many funny moments in your books. I wonder, and as you say, many of them that women identify with so significantly. I wonder if you'd read one of them.
I vacuum to avoid doing laundry. I change the bed sheets to avoid vacuuming. I fold clothes to avoid doing dishes. I do dishes to avoid putting the folded clothes away. I visit family to avoid doing groceries. I do groceries to avoid cleaning the house. I text to avoid talking on the phone. I talk on the phone to avoid visiting someone. I send emails to avoid making a phone call. I read a novel to avoid writing one. I write in my journal to avoid writing poetry. I write poetry to avoid telling the lies. I tell a lie to avoid feeling scared. I eat chocolate to avoid feeling sad. I pretend to sleep to avoid having sex. I have sex to avoid doing laundry.
Isn't it perfect? And it's exactly what we do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I could see myself any day of the week.
Yeah, today I did all kinds of this. I had some time to write and the dishes were there and I thought, oh, I have to do those dishes. So yeah, but it's true, avoidance is or procrastination, whatever word you want to use in there, but certainly they all affect each other, and making a choice to do one thing means you're making a choice to not do something else. So I'm very conscious of that.
Now you take part, or you arrange many poetry events. Why is that important to do?
So I like to be in a space with other creative people. And at the heart of it, that's why I do it. I like bringing creative people together. I like bringing poets together. I meet a lot of poets just in my life and the adventures that I go on. And so I'm not afraid to say, hey, do you want to do a reading with me? And I've been lucky so far that everyone I've asked has said yes. And so then I just figure out a place to have it based on kind of the poet and the writers that I know are going to be there. And I really enjoy making posters and using social media to get the word out for events. So, and I'm good at those things. I'm good at organizing and asking and making stuff happen. So all of that together just makes me really happy.
Do you find that poetry I don't suppose it's ever gone away, but do you find that people are embracing it more fervently, perhaps, the way of the beatniks in the 50s?
Absolutely. There's definitely a shift right now in the poetry world, especially with spoken word. So I don't think it ever truly went away. I don't think, written poetry has ever truly gone away. But having said that, spoken word really right now, especially with folks who are 17 to like 25 or 30, the slams, so basically slam just means competition, but that way of communicating is really big right now. It's also very social activism oriented. So at the heart of it and the goal of these huge, competitions that they have is, it is for social justice. So, when people are performing their pieces, there's a strong, really centered goal at the heart of why they're doing it. And that group of poets are not necessarily page poets. They're not trying to get their stuff published. They want to perform it and have an experience and an interaction with the audience. So that whole world right now is just huge, and social media is helping everybody connect. So I think these spoken words teams and people who have been doing their own thing over the years now have been able to connect. And now there's these huge, worldwide competitions that happen.
Where, do you have another book in the works? Before I ask you where to get your books?
Yeah, I have a new manuscript that I'm working on, but it's really messy. There's no focus to it yet, so I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. Right now, I'm just trying to write and not think about any outcomes.
So you'll have to come back at some point.
Okay, yeah.
But where can people buy your present books?
So they're available at Biblioasis. They're available at Chapters at Devonshire Mall, and they're available at the University of Windsor bookstore, or you can purchase them through my website.
Wonderful. Just one thing.
Yep.
It's Look at Her. Who's her? Is that you?
It is everyone. It is every her. Yeah. It is me. It is you. It is all the hers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. Well, if you see an announcement that Vanessa Shields is appearing at a venue near you, or even somewhat near you, go. It will be well worth it. Well, that's it for another show here on Scribes and Songsters. Thanks for watching. Our guests are important, but so are you. Till next time, I'm Veronique Mandel.
Stone Church to the library, from the lumber yard to the candy store. The world is as big as the ping pong table, but the train only ever takes me back to my own front door. Don't you want to live in a model railroad town, waving at the train as it circles around? Time has stopped on the hands of the station clock, and the only thing that's moving is the train. The only thing that's moving is the train. The only thing that's moving is the train.